With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. I am Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Warrior. Morning, Lorrie.
Good morning. I got all excited. Good morning.
That's good. We should be excited. We've got the best job in the world, right?
We do. I agree.
All right. So today we wanted to talk about the USDA and a new rule that they've put out this week, and it's part of the whole Packers and Stockyards Act, that whole thing that's been going on for a couple of years now. And what they announced this week was a third part of this rule. And actually, I have some audio from Secretary Vilsack, and I'm going to let him explain what they've done here.
Today, we announced the finalization of a third rule, which is focused on a fairer poultry tournament system. This is a system that has come under a great deal of concern and criticism by producers across the United States. We've taken this opportunity to listen to producers about what would create a fairer system, a more balanced system. We were told by producers that the rule should provide greater insight into a company's payment rates under the tournament system. That in the past, tournaments would allow either increases in compensation or deductions from the baseline pay under an agreement and within a tournament. The rule that we announce today is one that will end the capacity to reduce the base pay, but would continue to allow, obviously, for bonuses to be paid based on the competitive nature of the tournament. Producers also indicated that they were deeply concerned and wary about the variability that existed within payment rates within specific tournament activities. In order to address that concern, this rule basically provides and directs that no more than 25% of the contract can be based on that variability and difference based on the tournament. Producers also indicated to us that they needed more information and greater stability when it came to the level of inputs that would be distributed in connection with the tournament system. This rule basically provides that stability and greater information. And finally, producers expressed the need for key information on the nature and extent of capital improvements that might be required in order for a contract to be renewed or to be entered into. The rule that we propose and finalize today will, in our view, provide that key information and provide stronger leverage for producers.
So that was Agriculture Secretary speaking with ag reporters on the phone. Now, Lorrie, you have actually covered the Packers and Stockyards Act a lot more than I have because you do a lot more cattle news and things, and it's been big in the cattle industry. So I'd love to get your take on just the whole thing in general and also what this third part really means. Is it going to really make much of a difference?
That was going to be my question, actually.
See, I don't know. Since we both have the same questions, it brings to mind.
Yeah. But let's talk on that a little bit more. So I just want to point out here, Packers and Stockyards Act, we call it the PNS a lot. It has been thrown around for years, and it took me a little while to actually grasp what it was, because this is something that I started talking about 28 years ago when I started this career, not really understanding or realizing what it is. Mm-hmm. The Packers and Stockyards Act was from 1921. So this is a very, very old act. It regulates meatpacking, livestock dealers, market agencies, live poultry dealers, like what we're talking about today, and swine contractors. And its intended purpose is to prohibit unfair or deceptive practices. It prohibits giving undue preferences, apportioning supply, manipulating prices, or creating a monopoly. And so there's a lot in this. And one thing, this was back in 1921 that Congress and ag leaders realized it was an emerging problem. Then it's still an emerging problem now, and it's more and more. And as we've gotten bigger and things have changed so much, it still is the same type of issues that we have going on in the industry. And why it's taken so long to create the rules under this act, to me, I just don't understand that. And I have asked some ag groups, why so long, generations later, why are we just now working on this? It's just a matter of prioritization for USDA and for these agencies. And so I guess it has come up here as a priority under the Biden administration. As you mentioned, we're on our third rule. I don't know if we'll have time to get into the other two, but there's plenty of information online about those rules. But this is the second one that pertains to the poultry industry. And again, you started off, will this really make a big difference? I'm not so sure. It seems like it's almost to me like it's reversing the tournament system. It's instead of preferences, like you're not supposed to do, now we're going to pay a bonus. But to me, how do you set that up? And I know there's a lot smarter people out there than me to ask this question of, and these are questions I will be asking in interviews, by the way, is how are we going to set that up, a bonus system that isn't preferential, that is a legit bonus system? And how's that going to be proven? And is that going to be done case by case, or is that going to be done industry wide? Like, that's my first question, is how does this bonus system look? And again, isn't it kind of a reverse tournament, or am I just looking at that wrong?
No, I think that you bring up great questions. And the whole idea of the bonus system, isn't a bonus system supposed to be differential? I mean, that's why we have bonuses. It's because something stands out more than others, right? I
Good
mean,
point.
yeah, and I don't know. We're going to dig a little bit deeper into this. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about what the poultry tournament system actually is, and then take a closer look at this as well. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. We are talking about the latest from the USDA on the Packers and Stockyards Act, and they finalized a third rule, this dealing with the poultry tournament system. And I just wanted to, I was not very familiar with the poultry tournament system, so I had to actually look up, what does this actually mean? And it basically, from what I understand, and Lorrie, please jump in here and correct me if I'm wrong, but for, growers are measured against one another using performance metrics. So, meaning and I am reading this. This is not coming from my knowledge, but often feed conversion ratio, meaning the amount of feed required to produce a pound of chicken, along with average bird weight or livability. Also, all of the growers in a certain tournament will receive their chicks and feed at about the same time and grow them for the same amount of time. So their comparisons are more accurate, more direct. And there's a ranking system. Top performers may be paid more per pound, while below average performers receive less. So those are some of the things that traditionally, that's what the tournament system is for poultry. It's not a term that I actually had been familiar with before this.
It's kind of an odd term to use in this fashion, but I guess I'm so used to it that
Yeah.
not odd, but when I'm kind of stepping back and looking at it, yeah. So basically it is how well you raise your chickens, how the cost to feed ratio, you mentioned how much they weigh at the end, how your chickens produce is what you get paid. And we have contract agreements. 96% of our poultry producers, our mass poultry producers, are under a contract agreement with a buyer. And that buyer, and it's supposed to be set up ahead of time on how those metrics look. That's part of the issue here. And then that buyer pays based on those metrics. So the growers are really at the mercy of the buyer. But if I understand right, this is all supposed to be set up ahead of time. It's not kind of like get down to the end, bring your chickens in. It's like, no, not today. We're not paying this much today. Or,
Yeah.
it's supposed to already be set out there that way. And so in this case, these producers have been undercut for various reasons, and sometimes undercut very steeply.
Yeah. And so, I'm still just not fully grasping how I want to say how important, but maybe that's the wrong word, but this third rule, if it is actually going to change things in the poultry industry for the better. Um, we're literally in the last few days of the Biden administration. We're in the last few days of this USDA administration. And so to me, I wonder if there's an aspect of we need to just wrap this up, get it out. But there was at the same time in that same announcement that we played the audio from Vilsack, he also announced that they are just completely dropping another part of the rule because they don't have time to push it through. And they had the option of keeping it on the table for the next administration to take up. However, the next administration would be able to just change it and whatever. So they said it seems better to them to just completely withdraw it. And that's what they did. So I think that some of it here is also they're just trying to finish up some of the things that this administration of the USDA has been working on. But I still question how much this is actually going to affect producers.
I think that is an extremely fair assessment of what's going on here. I mean, I do hope we're wrong, but it is, to me, what you just said is a fair assessment of what's going on here. And this rule is supposed to, which this is what I don't understand either. It's already in the Packers and Stockyards Act, this wording. But this rule under the act, the rule within the rule, is supposed to provide transparent information to the poultry growers on what the buying companies are looking at, what they want from the farmers, what they require farmers to do in order to keep the contracts, the costs, what they're looking for as far as weights and feeds. And, then you can get into all the sticky stuff on natural and organic versus traditional, all those kinds of things. We won't get into all that here today, but there is supposed to be a very defined contract in place so that there's not questions, but there is questions. And to me, I don't see this as being any different. And this wording's already in the original rule.
Right. So, right. I mean, as much as I like Secretary Vilsack, which I do, it just feels like a little bit more bureaucracy to me. It's just government being the government for the government's sake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that wrong of me to say?
No, and we're just saying what people are thinking, I think.
I think so too.
And it's supposed to define the payment rates under this new rule. Well, if I'm a poultry grower and I'm contracting out with a big company, Tyson or any other large poultry company that is going to process my chickens, I'm going to want to know those prices like at the top of that contract. So why do we need more transparency on pricing? This is what I don't get.
Right. I mean, I'm all for transparency in all situations, but it does feel to me like I don't know, we're just kind of going over the same things as far as this rule goes. So did we really need more USDA rules? Maybe. I mean, we do want to give if what the agriculture secretary is saying is correct, and I trust him to say, what is correct. This is something that poultry producers have been asking for. I am not a poultry producer. I don't understand the situation as much, or nearly like they do. So if this is what they are asking for, I am happy that they received it. We are running out of time, so I think we can just wrap up on that and say congratulations to the poultry industry. I hope that this third rule is actually something that will help. All right, this is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Lorrie Boyer.
My guest here today is veterinarian Dr. Jim Keene. He is the Director of Veterinary Services with a nonprofit called Center for a Humane Economy. To get us going on the show here today, Dr. Keene, tell us more about yourself and your background.
Well, let's see. I mean, work background. I've got a DVM and a PhD in epidemiology, infectious diseases from University of Illinois, and I worked for 15 or 16 years. I was in practice briefly. Then I worked for 15 or 16 years for the USDA Meat Animal Research Center in Nebraska, which is it's the biggest livestock research center in the world. And then I joined the faculty. They started a new veterinary school in Nebraska. So then for 15 years, I worked at the veterinary school in Lincoln. I was doing a combination of teaching and research. And so my focus has been on infectious diseases of livestock. And in terms of things like bird flu, I've worked on several outbreaks around the world. The UK foot and mouth disease outbreak in 2001. I worked on African swine fever outbreaks in the Caucasus over several years. I worked on a big bird Newcastle disease outbreak in California in 2003. So I've got some experience working on these big, are called transboundary diseases like bird flu that readily move within and between countries. So they're problematic to deal with from a economic side and from a animal disease control side.
When I talk about H5N1 or bird flu, are these two different things or are they interchangeable?
Well, there's only one. So bird flu normally is not present in the US. We've had maybe a dozen or so outbreaks over the past 30 years. And so there's lots of different kinds of bird flu, but most kinds of bird flu just stick, the reservoir is wild birds, waterfowl in particular. But there's a certain type of bird flu called highly pathogenic avian influenza, HPAI, and they're pretty much always H5 or H7. There's a whole bunch of, it just says proteins on the surface of the virus. Only the H5 and the H7 actually cause severe disease in poultry and potentially, impact people, rarely. So we normally don't have H5 and H7. So, but those are the two that concern, countries when they enter if they're normally free of those viruses. So it's just a small subset. There's hundreds of bird flus, and there's just a small number that are concerned from a veterinary side or a human health, zoonotic risk side.
Why is this such a serious outbreak?
Well, okay, this H5N1, it appeared for the first time in China in the late 90s. They found it, and I don't remember, is either wild or domestic goose. China is kind of where the source of bird flu, it's the home base, or the home, that part of the world is the home base for bird flus. And they tend to leave, just like human flus kind of generally start out in Southeast Asia, and then they spread around the world. The same thing with the bird flus, or the same, similar. And that virus then spread around the world. So they went from, it spread through, the H5N1 spread through Southeast Asia, then went through Russia and the Middle East to Europe. And then it finally got to the US and North America in 2022. So it's been around for what, 25 years before it got here. And along the way, it mutated. It's just like COVID virus, the bird flus mutate. I mean, most of it stays the same, but they mutate. And the virus, when it arrived in the US, it's different from previous bird flus, and that it's much more, I'd say it's much more contagious among poultry. Normally, the bird flu virus goes from wild birds to domestic birds, but this virus goes back from domestic poultry to wild birds. So also, it spilled over into cattle for the first time ever. As you probably know, Colorado, I think, was one of the first states, or maybe it was Texas and Colorado, one of the two of the 16 states with dairy cattle bird flu. So, again, the virus changes, and it's very different. And the big difference is in past times when bird flu has got in the U.S., the response is stamping out. We don't allow or USDA does not allow vaccination for international trade purposes because countries won't accept product if you've got bird flu, and if you vaccinate, you have antibodies, you can't tell if it's natural or vaccine induced. So so in the past, when they did the stamping out policies, when you find bird flu, you kill all the animals, all the birds in the flock. And normally within 6 months to a year at longest, the virus is gone. But it's almost been 3 years now, and so the stamping out policy has not worked. USDA spent about $2 billion so far on the control and reimbursing owners. 130 million birds have died. The previous record was, I think in 2016, we had a bird flu outbreak, not H5N1, a different one, and they spent killed about 60 million birds. So it's more than double the time and double the number of birds and double the amount of money. So there's just something very different. And I would say, my interpretation of this is USDA keeps doing the same thing and it's not working. In fact, it's only getting worse. If you look at the data, the virus it's spreading as much now as it ever has. So I don't know the reasons why that is, but the policy of stamping out, of euthanizing all of the birds that are exposed, they need to reconsider that. Maybe it's time for national immunity. I don't know, but the question needs to be asked. I'll give an example. I worked on the foot and mouth disease outbreak in Europe, in UK in 2001, and that time I spent there, and there were many people, 100,000 people doing it, was just killing sheep and goats and cattle and pigs that were exposed. And they killed many, they destroyed the industry in Britain. And when they did a post-mortem after the outbreak, they said, we're never going to do that again. We're never going to just kill animals to control the disease because the cure was worse than the disease. And that may be the case here. I think USDA needs to reconsider their policies in a nutshell.
What would you suggest they do differently then?
That's a good question. I'm a little bit stumped by it. Well, one thing I can say is that, okay, I mentioned I worked on a Newcastle disease outbreak in California. There have been 15, and Newcastle disease is also not normally present in the U.S. It looks almost the same as bird flu. In fact, you can't tell them apart without doing, some diagnostic testing. It kills basically all birds, especially poultry, wild birds, very similar virus. And of the 15 U.S. outbreaks, it's 10 of those were caused by smuggling infected cockfighting birds over the border from Mexico. And you can tell they came from Mexico because you can do molecular signatures of the virus, so we know where it came from. And I can also say that I'm not saying it's the only cause, but I don't know if you know this, but illegal cockfighting, there's probably about 20 million gamecocks around the U.S. and they move around like crazy. They don't practice biosecurity. The birds are outdoors. The people who participate in cockfighting often work in the bird houses, the commercial bird houses. So that's one thing. And so basically, like, cockfighting laws are basically not enforced in the U.S. It's illegal everywhere if they're not enforced. It's an enormous industry with lots of other bad things associated with cockfighting beside the animal cruelty, drug running and prostitution and various sorts of crime. It's a cluster crime, basically. Like in Southeast Asia, when this bird flu started in Southeast Asia, cockfighting was a huge deal in spreading it both throughout Southeast Asia as well as spreading it from birds to people. And U.S. doesn't release data on the types of farms that they kill on, so we don't know if it's playing a role. But that's one thing, just in terms of prevention. Now, again, cockfighting was shown to be a big deal in Newcastle disease in the U.S. and a big deal in Southeast Asia for the same bird flu. I don't know if it's playing a role here, but that's one example of something that could be done from policy side. And there's legislation in Congress, one thing called the FIGHT Act, which would basically put more teeth to fight cockfighting. Because one thing I don't understand is, if you've been in most of there's about 130 million birds have been killed. And I don't know what bird flu is going to kill a lot, but again, the euthanized birds either suffocate with firefighting foam or they use carbon dioxide, to asphyxiate them, or else they will shut the ventilation down and add heat and overheat the birds and suffocate them that way. But these bird houses are, like, of the 130 million birds, about 100 million have been layers. I don't know what, egg prices here in South Dakota are about $8 a dozen right now, because we've killed off about 10% of the layers every year because of this outbreak. Supposedly, these farms have really good biosecurity, but it's getting in all these giant poultry farms. And I think that's one question. How is the virus getting into these large poultry farms? In theory, they have good biosecurity, and yet the virus is just spreading rampantly. And usually when viruses get in, it's probably coming through people, bringing it in. Those are some thoughts that come to mind.
I'm talking here today with veterinarian Dr. Jim King. He is the Director of Veterinary Sciences for the Center for Humane Economy, and we will continue our conversation right after this. Once again, my guest here today is Dr. Jim King. He is a veterinarian and is the Director of Veterinary Sciences for the Center for a Humane Economy. I'm Lorrie Boyer here on AgNet West. As we pick up on our conversation here today, talking about bird flu and the government's response to bird flu, is this something that we should worry about as the next pandemic?
It's hard to say, because you ever hear about gain of function, the term gain of function?
I have not.
Well, gain of function is a term that's used to describe, in a laboratory where you mutate the virus and to try to make it more transmissible or more virulent for people. And the first gain of function experiments were done with bird flu in the U.S. and in the Netherlands in 2010. And what they showed from those laboratory experiments, it just takes a very small number, 2 to 5 mutations in the gene of the virus to make it either transmissible, human-to-human transmissible, or to become more virulent for people. So it hasn't happened yet. Mutations tend to be random, but it's not a huge jump for the virus to become transmissible to humans. And again, when they had it in Southeast Asia, the mortality, there's about 900 cases occurred in Southeast Asia for the past 20 years or so. And the mortality was about 53%. So about 420 of those, or 450 of the 900 people who got infected died. Now the version of the virus here is it's a derivative of that one, and it does infect people. Now you probably heard it's going from cattle to people, and it's going from birds, wild birds or domestic birds, to people. But it dead ends in people. It doesn't transmit on. This virus has never in the world has infected a human, infected another person. But yeah, so in theory, it'd be very easy. It just a small number of mutations could make the virus readily transmissible between people and or make it virulent to people. So the barrier is not a huge barrier. So yeah, it's a concern, but right now there's no evidence that it's happened. There's about 65 people who've gotten infected with the bird flu so far since March. Those are the first U.S. cases, and they're all mild cases. The one person who died, I think, a couple of days ago, that was an old person who had a bunch of pre-existing conditions. So you can't really contribute that death completely to the virus. The virus might have been the final straw, so to speak, for that person. But if you have it's not normally, so I'm not, obviously the virus made that person sick, but there were other things going on. Sort of like a lot of the COVID deaths, as you know, were similar to that.
Thank you to my guest here today for joining me on the show, Dr. Jim Keene. He is a veterinarian and the Director of Veterinary Sciences with the Center for a Humane Economy, which is a nonprofit organization. For AgNet West, I'm Lorrie Boyer. Stay tuned. Sabrina Halvorson is coming up next.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
For this segment, we have this week's Almond Update brought to you by the Almond Board of California. You can find them online at almonds.com. I'm talking with Josette Lewis. We caught up with each other at the Almond Conference, which was held back in December in Sacramento. She's the Vice President and Chief Scientific Officer for the Almond Board of California. Here's our conversation. All right, we just went through a session here at the Almond Conference talking about pollinators and different things that growers can do to help with our pollinator population. Can you tell me a little bit about what was discussed in the session?
Yeah, I think most growers are well aware that honeybees are an important input to growing almonds. And we started talking with growers about using blooming cover crops as a way to improve honeybee health, but also to add some important agronomic benefits to their orchard to improve things like soil compaction, water infiltration. So there's a lot of great benefits to growing your trees from a cover crop in addition to helping honeybees. And then the other part of the panel is really talking about how we can also help native pollinators. Today, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service decided to list the monarch butterfly as a threatened species, and we also have some potential native bee endangered species listings here in California. So it's an opportunity for growers to show that agriculture is part of the solution to native pollinators. And we've seen a few handlers in our industry also see the market benefits of showing that almond growers are part of the solution to healthy ecosystems. There are some handlers that are providing incentives to growers from whom they buy almonds to add pollinator habitat and work through programs like the bee-friendly farming. So there's a market benefit, there's a benefit to being part of a healthy ecosystem, and for some of these practices also an agronomic benefit.
So what would it mean to have the monarch listed as threatened on the endangered species list?
With the Almond Alliance, we're very much watching what that will mean. I think we don't have all the information today from the federal government as to how that they will implement the implications of that listing decision. Together with the Alliance, we're watching, and we're also in discussions directly with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service so we can understand that. Our top concern is that we provide protection to growers who added habitat to their orchards. And on the panel today, we had someone from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service talk about how important it is that they encourage these practices, not discourage them. So they were here today to really deliver a message to the industry that they want to partner with us and they want to continue to see the types of activities that farmers have already been doing increase into the future.
So looking at honeybees, which of course, as you mentioned, are extremely important for the almond industry, there were several programs and opportunities discussed in this session that growers can participate in and for no cost. Can you tell us a little bit more about the availability of programs like this?
Yeah, I think all told there must be somewhere between $3 and $4 million available right now to growers to offset the cost of a variety of different practices that can help honeybees and native pollinators alike. So Project Apis M talked about the Seeds for Bees program, where you can get free cover crop seed and then purchase it at cost, or reduced cost into the future. Monarch Joint Venture has a habitat program that provides free planting material for growers. And Pollinator Partnership has both federal and state incentive grants to give to growers, $3 million of those. So that can help with both things like cover crop as well as out of the orchard habitat. And on the panel we did not have, but are available to growers, the Almond Alliance has a pollinator habitat program that has money already today for growers. Some of the resource conservation districts that are represented here in the grower incentive zone also have funds and technical assistance to help growers. So lots of money is available. Really just go up and talk to one of these organizations while you're here, because there's a great opportunity for this to be a practice you can implement with both free assistance and free financial help.
All right. Anything else that you think our listeners should know?
No, I think research shows that adding a blooming cover crop is great for honeybees. They're healthier coming out of those orchards, so we very much encourage growers to look at that practice. And by adding habitat outside the orchard, you have the opportunity to show that our industry really cares about native pollinators too. So hope growers make available to themselves the resources that are here at the conference.
All right. Thank you for your time. That's this week's Almond Update from the Almond Board of California. Find them online at almonds.com. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson, and we'll be right back. Looking at some of our agriculture news for today. A USDA biofuel infrastructure program is a facilitator behind increased biofuel availability at filling stations and pumps and potential increased economic opportunity. Here's Rod Bain with more.
More American drivers are becoming accustomed to fueling facilities supporting fuel blends with 15% ethanol through increased availability. One reason for this is fuel distributors and stations participating in a USDA program known in acronym form as HBIP.
The Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program. Think about your local gas station, and it's the type of infrastructure that they can use to build out new storage tanks, build out new fuel pumps to increase the use of biofuels.
Rural Business Cooperative Service Administrator Betsy Dirksen-Laundrigan says HBIP project funding awards were part of a recent USDA investment in clean energy development, promotion, use, and availability. The latest round of HBIP funding includes almost $60 million in projects in 19 states. One recipient is presented as an example of how HBIP works.
MB Truck Stop in Illinois, they received a $440,000 grant to install some ethanol dispensers, some other biofuel dispensers, and a biodiesel storage tank. And this particular project is in Rochelle, Illinois, and it's going to increase the amount of biofuels sold by 1.2 million gallons per year.
The biofuels industry has long appreciated USDA's support via the Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program as a mechanism to facilitate its growth. This is Donnell Rehagen of the Clean Fuels America Alliance.
Our biggest challenge as biodiesel producers and renewable diesel producers is finding the distribution. It's not just necessarily out there. So the HBIP program has allowed biodiesel producers and blenders to find investment partners in building out an infrastructure to widen that net of availability for higher blends of biodiesel.
Robert White of the Renewable Fuels Association says HBIP's success as a program goes beyond increased biofuel availability, but opportunities for retail fuel businesses to expand their operations and receive more value added.
It really got fuel retailers that would not have probably given us the time of day at this point in stage to actually install that infrastructure, and that'll be coming online in the next year or two. But you're going to see hundreds and hundreds of new stations selling E15 and E85 across the country, not just in the Midwest, but California to Florida and up into the Northeast. So exciting times in that HBIP program.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Is Ukraine still relevant in the world corn and wheat export markets? Todd Gleason speaks with an expert to get the answer.
Since the beginning of the war with Russia, Calusi says Ukraine's economy has been hit hard. Its GDP is still 22% below 2021 levels. And she thinks the recovery to pre-war levels could take up to 5 years, even if the war ended today. Now, before the conflict, Ukraine was a major player in global agriculture, exporting grains like corn, wheat, and vegetable oil to countries across Europe, Asia, and Africa. This year, its grain and oilseed production is expected to drop 74 million metric tons. That's 10% lower than the last season, says Calusi.
Ukraine has lost nearly half of its wheat production, primarily due to a decline in acres harvested rather than yields. A significant increase in wheat yields during the last 2 crop seasons has partially offset the sharp reduction in harvested area compared to the pre-war levels. Corn production has also been affected, though not as badly as wheat.
Calusi says the number of corn acres harvested has dropped, but the impact is less dramatic than that for wheat. This is because corn is produced widely across the country, with acreage in both central and northern parts of Ukraine, while wheat is heavily concentrated in areas closer to the conflict zones in the east and the south. The geographic proximity to the war has taken a greater toll than on wheat production in Ukraine, while at the same time, Calusi says, farmers have been adjusting to world market signals.
Like prices and export opportunities, which has helped maintain some stability. Still, lower yields and reduced acreage have kept overall corn production about 20% below pre-war levels.
Ukraine, despite the production issues, has enough corn and wheat to meet its domestic demand. This, in part, is because of the shrinking population and a lack of livestock in the country. That lack of livestock, by the way, is both a short and long-term issue. It's also one Ukrainians dealt with after the fall of the Soviet Union. People ate the cows and pigs without regard then for breeding stock. Rebuilding herds can be a years-long process. It's also probably one of the reasons why Ukraine has been able to meet its wheat and corn export demand currently, though corn exports fell by some 6.6 million metric tons in 2024.
But there is a bright spot here. Grain shipments via seaports now make up 80% of all shipments, the highest level since the war started. This shows that Ukraine's export logistics are holding up even in challenging circumstances.
Here then are the big picture numbers. Before the war, Ukraine's share of the global corn export market was 30%. It's expected to be 24% this year. Its share of the global wheat market has not suffered as much, down just 1 percentage point to 15%. So despite significant challenges, damage to its infrastructure, lost farmland, and reduced production, Ukraine's efforts to improve and secure its export logistics and to target those improvements to gain market share in Western Europe, well, they've worked. Todd Gleason.
That's our show for today. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. On behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for starting your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.